Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have such a large audience joining us from across the state and the country for tonight's event. One of the things that we've seen is doing things online has let us reach a much larger group of people. So if this is your first Humanities Institute event, something you couldn't have done on campus, welcome. A quick technical note, if you can hear me, but you can't see me, please look in the upper right-hand portion of your screen and click on View Webcams. That should solve your problem. My name is Liz Kiesak, and I'm the director of the Humanities Institute at the University of South Florida. I'd like to thank our program assistant, Jade Von Werder, for the wonderful job she does promoting and managing events like these. This evening's event is co-sponsored with the USF Institute on Black Life, and at this time, I'd like to invite former IBL director, Dr. Cheryl Rodriguez, to join us and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Liz and Jade, for your co-sponsorship of this very exciting event. Good evening, everyone in attendance. I'm Cheryl Rodriguez, Associate Professor of Africana Studies and Anthropology here at the University of South Florida. I'm in the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies. I am the former director of the USF Institute on Black Life, and tonight I am speaking on behalf of the current director, Professor Fenda Akiwumi, who is unfortunately unable to join us this evening. Since 1986, the Institute on Black Life has been a very vibrant site for promoting research on the Black experience in Africa and its diaspora. IBL has been actively engaged in a rich array of service activities with the community, and IBL also has prioritized community engagement through our interactions with local African diasporan, and African American organizations. We have a history of providing support for faculty research, and we also have a robust scholarship programs that promotes and supports students here at USF. Our annual conference brings together scholars, activists, service providers, faculty, and students to discuss a range of really critical topics affecting Black communities. So I just want to say good evening to everyone, and as a faculty member who spent a career teaching about race and racism, and who will be teaching a course on the Black Lives Matter movement next semester, I am thrilled to be here. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for bringing this very energizing knowledge to USF. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. We're going to put a link to the USF Institute on Black Life into the chat so that our audience members are able to maybe explore a little more in depth about the incredible work that this institute does for the university and the community. It's now my privilege to introduce tonight's speaker, Frank Leon Roberts. As Dr. Roberts is speaking tonight, you can submit questions using the Ask function in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll hold on to them until the Q&A session tonight. Recently referred to by Dr. Cornell West as one of the powerhouse intellectuals of his generation, Dr. Frank Leon Roberts is an anti-racist educator and political organizer on the front lines of the contemporary movement for Black lives. The proud son of two formerly incarcerated parents, he is the founder of the Black Lives Matter syllabus, the nationally acclaimed open access curriculum that provides resources for teaching Black Lives Matter in classroom and community settings. His mix of political activism and scholarly rigor combine to create inspired real-world ways for educators to be better allies both in and out of the classroom. We are all here tonight because we recognize the critical need to create a socially just culture, and I know this evening will help us all take another step forward. Before we welcome Dr. Roberts on screen, there is a video that we're going to begin with. It's possible that your audio may be a little loud. Please watch this. It's going to vary from computer to computer.
On December 5th, 2015, I found myself chained to a bench in a New York City jail cell. Earlier that night, a grand jury announced that a police officer by the name bodies on the West Side Highway, the busiest highway in New York, intentionally disrupting the flow of traffic and hoping to disrupt people's sense of complacency. Not surprisingly, 40 of us were arrested. I spent the next 19 hours in a jail cell. I still remember the faces and the stories of the people in that holding cell with me. I remember the story of Dizay, an 18-year-old high school senior who was petrified at the fact that he was in jail. I remember the story of Madeline, a Black trans woman who was rightfully outraged at the fact that she was in a men's holding cell. I remember thinking about how their very presence in that cell seemed like a form of violence, seemed inappropriate. But I also remember that night something kind of strange and amazing happened. People started talking to each other. Yo, this shit is so fucked up. It reminds me of the new Jim Crow that Michelle Alexander be talking about. Wait, the new Jim Crow, what book is that? Oh yeah, have you read that book? No, I haven't read that, but I have read Angela Davis's Are Prisons Obsolete? Are you familiar with that? Yeah, I think I am familiar with that book. You know, Angela Davis reminds me a lot of Audre Lorde. Have you read A Litany for Survival? No lie. By the time we got out of that jail, 19 hours later, every single person in that cell had shared one book or essay that they were reading. I mean, it was almost like we had formed some kind of bootleg jailhouse book club. At some point, someone had asked me what I did for a living. I told them I was a professor at New York University and that I taught courses in the field of African American studies. Dizay, the high school senior, said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, I wish I could take a class with you. I wish I could take a class there, but I could never afford NYU. It was really that experience that first got me to start thinking about this idea of creating non-traditional learning spaces for the circulation of radical ideas. It also got me to thinking about the need to create space for people who exist outside of the academy to be able to have access to robust conversations about books, about ideas, about authors. After all revolutions begin with ideas. That night, a project called Black Lives Matter Syllabus emerged. In the 3 years since that night, a lot has happened: a class, a book, a community tour, but not a day goes by where I don't remember how it all started. There, in a jail cell, with a group of Black people, chained to a bench, talking about the power of what they were reading.
Wonderful. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Frank Leon Roberts.
Okay, can we hear me okay?
Yes, you sound good.
Okay, awesome. I don't think we need to share the screen just yet. Can we hold off on sharing the screen for just a few seconds?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that warm introduction. You know, it is such a blessing and an honor to be with you this evening, even if only virtually. You know, I wish I was there in person. I wish gathering were permitted, but I'm grateful to be here nonetheless. So much has happened since 2017, which was the last time I had the honor of being at USF. And so much has happened, and yet so much has remained the same. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. You know, they say it takes a village, and when they came up with that phrase, they weren't just talking about what it means to raise a child, they were also talking about what it takes to actually put together a speaker series. So we want to thank all of the villagers who are responsible for putting this series together and putting tonight's programming together. One villager in particular, I want to acknowledge the work of the revolutionary sister, Liz Keesack, the director of the Humanities Institute. Such a champion for the humanities and for freedom fighters everywhere, and such a gift to the USF community. I hope you all recognize that. So thank you, Sister Keesack. Also, Jade Von Water, as well as Dr. Cheryl Rodriguez and Dr. Fenda Akawumi, which I believe I mispronounced that brilliant sister's names. Forgive me in advance. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the politics of naming. But I want to thank all of you and all the folks who actually took some time out in the middle of the week to have this conversation with us. So listen, I'm a jazz man, which means I like to improvise. The way these things usually work is if I were there in person, I would try to kind of take the pulse of the room, see what the crowd is like, and then decide what I'm going to do. I can't do that, but I'm still nonetheless going to improvise a little bit. I want to think of tonight as less of a talk or a workshop, and really more as a series of reflections or provocations or even call to actions. I'm really most looking forward to the conversation piece when we get to be in dialogue together. So I'll talk to you for a little bit, and then we're going to get into the good stuff, which is when we get to talk to each other. But what I think that I want to do this evening is really two things. I want to start by providing some very specific frameworks for approaching race in the classroom, right? This idea of building an anti-racist pedagogy. 5 fundamentals that I think are essential for building an anti-racist classroom and or talking about race in the classroom. And then from there, I kind of just want to pull back and reflect on this moment. You know, we're a couple of days away from an election, and I want to talk about what I think are the moral obligations of freedom fighters everywhere in this moment. So 2 things, 5 fundamentals for anti-racist educators, followed by 5 moral commitments for anti-racist activists. Cool? Okay, I think it's time for me to try sharing this screen. Oops. Now, Sister Liz, can you let me know if you can see that screen all right?
Yep, it's working perfectly.
Okay, awesome. So, I will say this. Actually, you know what? I want you guys to be able to see me again. So I'm gonna actually exit this for a second and talk to you, because that's what the Spirit's telling me to do. So listen, I want to start by saying this. You know, a lot of talk right now about how we make sense of this strange moment in history. And one of the things that we know about how white supremacy tends to operationalize itself historically is that there is traditionally a period of progress followed by a period of backlash. And all the historians in the room, I mean, you know this story well. It's happened at least 3 times in American history. It started in the context of the 19th century. We had all of the progress that came in the aftermath of the Civil War. We had the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the so-called Freedom Amendments. We had the first Black senators. We had the emancipation of African slaves. And then that period of Reconstruction was followed up by what? Post-Reconstruction, the dawn of Jim Crow, the next 100 years of state-sanctioned lynching, the birth of the Ku Klux Klan, goes on and on and on. So that was backlash number 1. Fast forward to the middle of the 20th century. You had all of the legislative gains of the civil rights era. You had the passage of the Voting Rights Act I guess that's 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68, Malcolm, Martin, Bayard, Fannie Lou, all in the streets, all that period of progress in America, which was followed up by what? The rise of the new Republican Party, the age of Nixon, the age of Reagan, the war on drugs, which was really a war on Black people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know this story well. What am I getting at? Brothers and sisters, we are essentially living in a 3rd Reconstruction. This is a 3rd Reconstruction. We know that all of the gains of the past, well, now the past 8 years, have been erased, right? And we're living in this strange moment where we're experiencing the backlash. And I wanted to start there because we know for a fact that not only are the humanities experiencing a backlash right now, people who do this work, people who are interested in doing anti-racist educating, anti-racist pedagogy, we are all under attack right now. And so it's important for us to think about, what does it mean to be an anti-racist educator in the midst of a post-Reconstruction backlash? That's the kind of quasi-academic, also political question that I want you to be thinking about tonight. What does it mean to be an anti-racist educator during this third Reconstruction? Now, with that being said, I wanted to share with you, let's see if we can get the PowerPoint right back on the screen. So I wanted to start by talking to teachers. Sister Liz let me know that there are a lot of teachers and professors in the room tonight, and so I wanted to think very specifically about what it means to approach race in the classroom and 5 specific fundamentals for anti-racist educators. So bear with me while I talk to the teachers for a while. I think I would say that there are 5 fundamentals. The first, if you are interested in teaching race in the classroom, if you are interested in developing anti-racist pedagogy in this moment, if you are interested in calling yourself an anti-racist activist or anti-racist educator, the first thing you need to do when you get to your classroom is be willing to, 1, identify where your students are, where both you and your students are, on what I call the triple A's, the triple A's of social justice consciousness. Okay, what do I mean by that? One of the things I've learned doing this work over the course of the past 20 years is that social justice activism in America is usually a 3-step process that begins with acknowledgement, moves into action, and ends with accountability, right? So what does that mean? It means that generally the way that people come to this work as social justice activists is with acknowledgement, right? So acknowledging. So for instance, we know that every 28 hours, a Black person is killed by the police in the United States. So we start by acknowledging that, right? Like that's the first wake-up call. Something is wrong with that. Then after you acknowledge, you move into the space of action. Now, action looks like many things. Actions can look like joining a protest. Action can look like joining a classroom. Action can look like joining a work group. Action can look like blogging. There's so many ways to take the form of action. And then lastly, you get to that last piece, which is accountability. And accountability is about how do we hold people and institutions accountable for the harm that they've done. But here's where I'm going at, brothers and sisters. What I've learned is that part of the problem with race in America is that oftentimes Black and white Americans exist on 2 very different planes within this broader spectrum of consciousness. And the same is true about, the same dynamic is true in the classroom. So for instance, right now, we're hearing a lot of talk about defunding the police and abolishing prisons. All of that is about people who are already in that 3rd phase of social justice consciousness, and those people want accountability. Whereas oftentimes, on the other hand, you often have white folks who are still struggling with how to get to number 1, which is acknowledgement, acknowledging that there even is a problem before you're able to move into the action piece or the accountability piece. What I am getting at is that the role of the anti-racist educator, first and foremost, is to be able to identify where your students are along this spectrum, along this continuum, and be willing to empathize with all of them. So you're going to have some people in the room who are still working on acknowledgement. They're not even sure that they think that there is a problem. Then you're going to have the other students in the room who are, they're already talking about demarginalizing the intersection of race and sex, et cetera, et cetera. And then some folks are in between. They're taking your class as a form of action. But the first goal of the anti-racist educator is to be able to identify where you and your students are on the spectrum of social justice consciousness. That's what I call the triple A's. Next, if the slide actually, let's see. Okay. One of the slides is missing. The second thing I would say is the importance of establishing collective agreements early on. Establishing collective agreements early on. Now, here's the deal. This idea of, actually, let's start with a poll. How many people in the audience are already familiar with collective agreements? Or let me ask it differently. How many people in the audience already do collective agreements in their classroom? I'm interested to know. I have no idea how to actually read the polls, but I know that Sisters Jade and Liz, they do, and they can help me out with figuring out what the folks are saying.
We'll
Looks
let
like
you
we
know
got
when we have it.
about 71% no, 29% yes.
Oh, so 71% do not do collective agreements in class yet.
Correct.
Okay, that's great. See, that's why we're here tonight. We just getting started. So collective agreements. So collective agreements is a practice that is very, very common in social justice spaces. So I imagine that the 20-something odd percent that are familiar probably have some relationship to activist communities, because it's been a practice that's been going on for years. But one of the things I think is so interesting is that in the classroom, it's a very new practice. And I have found that the key to having productive conversations about race is being willing to establish collective agreements with your students early on. When I say early on, I mean day one. So what do I mean by some of these collective agreements? And now I'm gonna have to get a little close to the screen because I can't quite even see. But while I pull up this other screen over here, I'm gonna talk to you. So this is an example, and I'm going to make this available to Sister Liz so that she can put it up on the Humanities website or distribute it to whoever wants it, that you can use this in your classroom. But this is one of the things that I do on the first day with my students. This collective leadership and meeting agreements. Number one, we will embrace multisensory learning. You know, when you're talking about race, it really requires us to break away from this traditional paradigm of asking students, what did they read? Or what did you think about the readings? Like the typical pedagogical question is, what did you think about the readings? Or let's discuss the readings. What I've tried to do in my classroom is really take a more multisensory approach. And what I mean by that is sometimes I don't ask my students, what did they think about the readings? I ask them, what did you see? What did you hear? And most importantly, what did you feel? This question of feeling, what do you feel while you're reading this? Or what do you feel when you're discussing a topic? I do think it's pedagogically useful. So it's one of the tips I want to urge all the budding anti-racist educators in the room to adopt this process of asking students, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? One more example on this, then I'm going to move on to the other ones. So for instance, let's say you're teaching, you know, Toni Morrison's Beloved, or you're teaching The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Traditionally, you know, you might come to class and ask the students, well, what did you think of the readings? A different way that you might approach that question is to say to the students, okay, what did you feel reading this? What did you see reading this? Meaning they have to actually conjure up their own imaginations. And then lastly, what did you hear listening to this text? So that's something I want us to think about. Number two, speak my truth and allow others to do the same. Everyone in the space of the classroom gets to be an expert of their own experience. That's what I tell my students in day one, that listen, we have no experts here except experts of our own experience. And the good thing about that is that when you give students space to be experts of their own experience, they'll speak from that place and be less worried about getting it right or wrong, because no one can tell you that your experience is right or wrong, right? So this idea of be willing to speak your truth, but also understand that your truth is not the only one. That's something that I really want my students to have a collective understanding with on day one. Number three, be uncomfortable. Uncomfortability is the space where learning happens. I think it's so important for us to get out of this paradigm of students wanting to be comfortable in the classroom. In my classroom, I want you to be uncomfortable. Another thing that we do on day one, these collective agreements, is the idea of honor chosen names and identities. We will honor our classmates' names and identities, which means what? We will refer to people by their names and by the self-identifications that these people have asked us to recognize. And that's very important. But let me also say this. I know we've grown accustomed to this practice of having students go around the room and talk about their gender pronouns. And I think that's a very important practice, right? I have found that, for instance, when I teach my Black Lives Matter class, I actually also ask students to be clear about their racial identifications, right? So for instance, I would say, you know, my name is Frank. My pronouns are he and him, and I identify as a Black American man. This practice, first and foremost, and you can do this in any class. It doesn't necessarily have to be the class about race, but it makes the most sense in that context, right? When you're teaching courses that have a lot of racial justice or racial material in it, it establishes up front that we're interested in knowing who we are, and we're interested in honoring people's identification. I will also say to the faculty folk that are listening, you know, one of the classic, let me say this differently, the Black faculty who are in this, who are listening tonight, and the faculty of color as well as women, you know, a lot of times we go through this issue where we want to walk this tightrope between, on the one hand, being approachable to our students, but at the other hand, also requiring that there's a certain boundary of respect. And so I'll tell you what I'm going with this. Where I'm going with this, I can't tell you how many times I get into the classroom and on day one, you know, students are referring to me as Frank, and I'm cool with that. I mean, people who know me know I'm a pretty humble, modest guy. My name is Frank, right? So I actually would prefer for you to call me Frank in some instances, but let me do that. And what I'm getting at is that as faculty of color and Black faculty, we want to be clear with our students about establishing how we want to be named. So I say, the way I introduce myself in the classroom, I say, listen, my name is Frank, my pronouns are he or him. I'd like for you to refer to me as Dr. Frank. And not to be arrogant, not to set up this hierarchy, but because I realize, particularly on PWIs, predominantly white institutions, there is a politic in being in a body of color or a queer body or a female body or a woman's body in a position of leadership. Very often on these campuses, students are not used to that. So this process of naming is important, right? So all of that is to say, you want to make sure there's a space for all students to say their name, literally tell the class and tell you how they want to be called, and that you as the instructor, you get to do the same, right? The rest is all pretty self-explanatory. We are all learning. We will share this space together. We will expect unfinished business. We are willing to get uncomfortable. And then here's another one that I do. We will be held accountable for antagonistic behavior towards ourselves and towards each other, towards each other and towards the instructor. You know, again, anybody who's ever taught a course on race or issues related to race in the context of your curriculum will sometimes deal with that student that is the difficult student, right? That is extra antagonistic. And there's oftentimes a lot of questions about, okay, how do you deal with that student? The way I deal with it is this. The reason that I do the collective leadership and meeting agreements on day one, and be clear, this form I have circulated among the students add to it with the specific collective agreements that they want to have entered into this classroom experience, and then everyone must sign the document. And then what happens is this. If I'm having trouble with a student later in the semester, the student that wants to challenge me on every single racial justice issue, I get to go back and say, listen, I actually think that you are in violation of our collective agreements at this point, because it seems as though you're being intentionally antagonistic, and it's actually disrupting my ability to teach. You signed an agreement, now you're in violation of it, right? Also, another thing I do on day one in my class, in my Black Lives Matter class, and in any class I've ever taught that includes topics related to race, we say in these collective agreements that we hold these truths to be self-evident. Racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism are real, period. Now we can have a debate about the degree to which they are real, but we're not going to spend session after session debating the mere existence. And we're going to talk about a little bit the importance of educators being, anti-racist educators being willing to draw a moral bottom line, right? And so in my class, we're not going to spend an excessive amount of time debating the mere existence of verifiable facts. I think it's important to establish those kind of collective agreements with students on day one. Number 3, don't worry, we only got 2 more to go, and we can get rid of this. We can get rid of this slideshow after that. Number 3, we want to be. I think the role of the anti-racist educator is to be aware of the unspoken racial dynamics that often prohibit productive classroom dialogue. So one of the things, there are kind of 4 syndromes that you'll often see, what I call the invisible dynamics of race that happen with students. Now, I am being completely reductive. I'm overgeneralizing. This is not true for every student. This is not true for many students. But it is true for a critical mass of students. And so I wanted, because there's so many teachers in the room and our conversation tonight is really about pedagogy, I wanted us to take a moment in order for us to be able to say this. The role of the anti-racist educator is to be able to go into the classroom understanding that you're often going to run into this. So what am I talking about? White students very often are burdened by what I call white fear syndrome, right? That's the I don't want to say the wrong thing. Many of the white students who are in our classes with course content related to race, gender, sexuality, etc., are not there to be antagonistic. They're there to learn, but oftentimes they feel burdened because they don't want to say the wrong thing. Or on the other hand, you might have white student fragility syndrome, where the students feel personally attacked. On the opposite end of the spectrum, very often Black students are burdened by what we might call racial representative syndrome. Y'all know what that is. Racial representative syndrome, where the Black students feel like, I have to speak, right? Otherwise, they won't think I have something to say, or they meaning everyone who's not Black, might not think this is important, or I have to be the local expert on race. A lot of Black students carry that burden in the classroom. Also, our Asian and Latinx students often feel like either this doesn't apply to me, in the sense that they often feel excluded from the Black-white racial binary that we have in this country, right? So they feel as though the conversation doesn't, their lived experiences don't fall within that Black-white binary, and they don't. Or they feel like they have to choose a side, right? I have to choose a side. Am I with the white students or the Black students? These are the things that I've heard from students over the years, right? And I call that the racial triangulation syndrome. And then very often, our Indigenous and Native students often feel like I am invisible in this conversation, right? So that's that racial invisibilization. Here's what I'm getting at, y'all. The role of the anti-racist educator is to simply be able to name those dynamics in the classroom. I can't tell you what a difference it makes. When we're in the classroom, I might say, okay, Sister Liz, as a white woman, are you feeling uncomfortable in this conversation? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells? Or I might say, Sister Dr. Rodriguez, as a Black student in this classroom, do you feel like you have to be the expert on this topic? The floodgates will come spilling open when you talk to students in that way. That's been my experience. So this is one of the tips that I want to offer for those interested in developing an anti-racist pedagogy. It simply means being aware of the common invisible dynamics that happen along the lines of race, right? Number 3, I would say, number 4, actually, would be center your teaching on addressing structures and ideologies rather than on specific identities, right? So in my class, because you'll always get the one student who in their paper, they're talking about, the white man and men and this, that, and we often, our job as anti-racist educators is to say, actually, let's be really clear. In these conversations, we're not interested in attacking particular groups or even attacking particular identities. What we're here to do is dissect and pay attention to the underlying ideologies and systems and structures that give birth to these identities. So in my classroom, I'm real clear. I'm not interested in, devoting conversations critiquing white people, right? That's not what I do. What I am interested in is talking about whiteness and white supremacy. I'm not interested in critiquing men. I'm interested in critiquing maleness and patriarchy, right? Or sexism. This is not a critique of straight people. We're talking about critiquing systems like heterosexism and homophobia. We're not critiquing rich people. We're critiquing capitalism, classism, etc. So all of this is to say, part of the role of the anti-racist educator, fundamental number 4, is to learn how to teach students to think about underlying structures and systems, ideologies and ideas, rather than specific people. Because, as we well know, doing this work, when I say the work, I mean the work of being alive in a racist country, a sexist country, a classist country, a homophobic country, is that these systems that you see on the right-hand side of your screen can be attached to anybody. Some of the most white supremacist people I've ever met are Black people. We've got one on the Supreme Court. So we know the emphasis has to be on the systems rather than critiquing particular groups. I would say number 5 would be commit to teaching race in an intersectional way. Commit to teaching race in an intersectional way. In my class in Black Lives Matter, I always begin with the story of the founders of Black Lives Matter. 3 Black women, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza. And if we were in person right now together, I would say, please stand up and clap for them, because I always want to make sure I give them love in these conversations. But why is the story of Black Lives Matter important? It's important because it allows us to think about teaching race in an intersectional way. So I always say that Black Lives Matter as a movement belongs not only to Black history, but also to women's history as well as LGBTQ history, right? The fact that BLM was founded by 2 of the 3 women, forgive me for those who are already familiar with this, I'm just trying to get us all on the same page, trying to set us up here. But for those who are unfamiliar, Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 Black women, 2 of whom were queer. One of the Black women is also a member, is an immigrant rights activist, a Nigerian American. And so the point here is, it's an example of how you get to talk about racial justice in an intersectional way. That when we are talking about race, particularly when we're talking about Blackness, we are always already talking about gender, talking about sexuality, talking about class, talking about things that are not just cisgender heterosexual Black men. So if you are teaching race in that way, you want to do it differently. You want to do it differently. I will also say this, and this is not in the slide. Let's go through this right quick. The 5 fundamentals: identify where your students are on the spectrum of the AAAs. Remember, are they struggling with acknowledgement? Have they already sprung into action? Or are they the super woke students already dealing with trying to call for accountability? Establish your collective agreements early, meaning on day 1. Acknowledge the invisible racial dynamics in the room when you're talking about race in a multiracial context. Focus on structures and systems rather than people in politics, and approach race in an intersectional way. I would also say, again, being an anti-racist educator means you must be willing to unapologetically draw bottom lines, right? And so for me, again, it's at the bottom line, I'm not willing to have a conversation about whether or not racism is real. That's not for me. It might be for some other educators, but for me, that's not how I do things. I think we can get rid of this the slideshow and the screen share. But before that, Sister Jade, I think I missed a poll question. I don't even remember what my designated poll question is, but let's return to it.
All right, we're going to pop that in so that people can answer the second poll question.
Yes. So where do we think that most students at USF land on the AAAs of social justice consciousness? I'd be really interested to know that. Give you a few seconds to think about it. And that includes yourself. Wow, that's powerful. That is powerful. So 77%, the vast majority dealing with this issue of awareness. So struggling with step one. And let's be clear, when I say it's a spectrum, that does not mean we can get rid of the screen share. When I say it's a spectrum, what that doesn't mean it's a spectrum, not a hierarchy. So that doesn't mean that the people who are on step 3 are somehow morally superior to the people who are on step 1. Because guess what? One of the things I've learned teaching race in the classroom is that many of the students who think they are on phase 3 of the spectrum, they are talking about accountability. Very time, the idea of intersectionality or class analysis is new, which means they're on step 1. Acknowledgement when it comes to that. So we are always learning. So I hope that helps you, this idea of the triple A's of social justice consciousness. Listen, I'm gonna speed things up because we gotta get into conversation, but I do want to say this. I want to speed up and talk about, listen, I would be really remiss, me being the guy that I am. You know, most folks know I'm not usually in a suit and tie. I'm not usually talking just to faculty. I'm usually talking to activists and students. So I want to talk, I want to be authentic to me and talk from that space. And we have an election coming up in a couple of days, so I would be remiss to not reflect on that. That's what's coming up. You know, when I came to USF the first time, if I'm not mistaken, I think, you know, Sister Liz will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was actually the same month as inauguration. I actually came in January 2017. And so now the idea that literally 4 years later, that I would be here again on the eve now of an election is interesting. And you know, I don't know where you all were on election day 2016. Florida is a very different place from New York. But on election day 2016 in New York City, we were mourning. Many of us were mourning. Election day felt like a funeral. When those results came in at 11:49 p.m., you know, many of us were mourning. We were mourning for a country that we wanted to have, a future that we wanted to be building, a world that we no longer thought was possible. But I always say there was one good thing that came out of election day 2016. That on November 3rd, 2016, when 65 million Americans decided to vote for a reality TV star with no legislative experience as its next commander-in-chief, there was one good thing that came out of that. And here it is. America finally told the truth. America told the truth. It told the truth about the way it feels about women. It told the truth about the way it feels about disabled folk. It told the truth about the way it feels about immigrants. America told the truth. It told the truth about the way it feels about a woman's right to choose. It told the truth about the way it feels about gay people getting married. It told the truth about the way it feels about a movement for Black lives. It was an ugly truth, but it was the truth nonetheless. And I come from that tradition that says truth is always the precondition for transformation. And so what I'm getting at is, now that America has told the truth, what are we going to do with it? And so I want to end with this really quickly, that this question of what does it mean to be an anti-racist, not just educator, but anti-racist activist, freedom fighter, freedom dreamer in this moment. When we are 7 days away from an election day, we don't know what's coming next on the other side, but whatever comes on the other side, whichever way you want it to go, I hope that you will commit to 5 moral obligations. Number 1, for those of us who call ourselves educators, we've got to be willing to use this moment to produce new knowledge production, both institutionalized and non-institutionalized. Okay, what the hell do I mean by that? You know, we forget, I think it was in the context of all of the sweat, blood, tears, organizing, and resistance of the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, the women's rights movement, that we saw the birth of new fields of knowledge like African American studies, women's studies, LGBT studies, gender and sexuality studies. And so the question is, how can we use this moment in history, this moment of intense social and political unrest, to be advocating for new forms of knowledge production in the academy? What would it mean to talk about the birth of social movement studies as its own field? What would it mean to use this moment to press our institutions to fund peace studies as an actual major? Those are the questions that anti-racist organizers and the administrators out there, all the deans and the provosts and the fancy people at the top, think about how this moment might be the moment to give birth to those new knowledges. Number 2, we've got to be willing to tell ourselves the truth. We got to be willing to tell the truth again. Learn how to tell the truth. James Baldwin said it best. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Being a racial justice activist and an anti-racist educator requires a willingness to tell the truth in public. And the truth of the matter is this: the President of the United States has engaged in the past 4 years in what can only be described as racist, sexist, xenophobic behavior. And we need to just sit with that and tell the truth about it, not sugarcoat it, not be afraid to do it. Learn how to tell the truth. That is the charge and the call to action for the anti-racist educator in this moment. Tell the truth in public. That's number 2. Number 3, being an anti-racist educator means being willing to stand in solidarity at your institution with the people who are underneath you in the treacherous hierarchies of the academy. That means not just standing in solidarity with students, but standing in solidarity with the janitors, with the people who clean the floors, with the people who clean the chalkboards after you leave the classroom, with the people who are in the cafeteria cooking the food, with the people mowing the lawn, with the underpaid security guards. How are we in this moment in solidarity with them? And I'm really interested right now in the work of the Philly-based community organizer Wendy Marshall, who talks about the American university as a 21st century plantation. And that's a bold metaphor. And not everybody's with that metaphor. I struggle with that metaphor because we don't want to take things out of context. But it is worth asking ourselves, where are you on the plantation? And how can you stand in solidarity with those who are beneath you on this thing we call higher education, the academy, okay? Number 4, if you want to be an anti-racist educator or you want to be an anti-racist activist, you've got to be willing to be a problem. You've got to be willing to get in trouble. That means, yes, you're going to end up in the dean's office. Yes, you're going to end up on the front page of the local news. Yes, you might end up having a debate with or sitting with the board of trustees. You got to be willing to get in trouble. Too many of us, if we keep it real, have been more interested in getting tenure than we have been in doing the work of truth and justice and truth telling in public. If you want to be an anti-racist educator, you've got to be willing to be in trouble. And listen to the young people out there who are listening, to the students. If you want to have your names written in the history books, you've got to be willing to be a problem. You see, Malcolm X, he was a problem. Audre Lorde, oh, she was a problem. James Baldwin, oh, yeah, he was a problem. Byron Rustin, Fannie Lou Hamer, they were a problem. Colin Kaepernick, he was a problem for the NFL, right? So that if you want to be willing to leave your mark on your campus and in your community, you've got to be willing to be a problem. Do I have any troublemakers in the building? I wish that was a poll that I put, because I want to know how many troublemakers are at USF. Lastly, because we got to go and have group conversation, I want you to be, the students in particular, I want you to be remembering your WWW, what I call your WWW. What are you standing with? What are you standing on? What are you standing for? And as students at the University of South Florida, you are standing on the shoulders of giants. Great people who came out of this fine institution. That's what you're standing on. Because of them, you are standing on solid rock. Then who are you standing with? This is the moment to check your coalitions. You don't have to be Muslim to be speaking out against anti-Muslim rhetoric. You don't need to be gay in order to be speaking out against anti-gay rhetoric. You don't need to be Black in order to be calling for a Black Lives Matter movement. Who are you standing with in this moment? And then lastly, that question of what are you standing for? It's a question that all of us need to be asking ourselves as we get ready for the next 4 years in our lifetimes, whatever that looks like. And then this really is the last thing before we turn it over. I want you all to remember, those of us who care about freedom and justice, those of us who consider ourselves anti-racist activists, we have to remember that our struggle is qualitative, not quantitative. Our struggle is qualitative, not quantitative. I want you to go back and read that 1966 essay by Dr. Martin Luther King on nonviolent, it's called On Nonviolence. And he says, our struggle is that we need not simply a quantitative shift in conditions, but a qualitative shift in shift in souls. Okay, you studied, Frank. What the hell are you trying to say? Here it is. There are more people in this country who love rather than who hate. I know that. There are more people in this world who love rather than who hate. I know that. So the problem is not quantitative. There are more of us than there are of them. But the problem is the people who hate, the haters, know how to do so with conviction. And so part of what this moment requires is for us to learn how to love with conviction. That is what Dr. Martin Luther King understood when he talked about the strength to love. We have to understand teaching and being a student and being a racial justice liberator as critical acts of love. We have to remember that justice is what love looks like in public. And remember, we can do this, y'all. We can change these universities. We can change our country. We can change our world. We can do this, whatever the it is. If together we organize, together we mobilize, together we dream, then together we will win. Now I want to hear from you. I think I did that preacher thing where I talked way more than what I was supposed to.
No, I think it was great.
But I don't gotta go nowhere. The clock ain't running for me. But I know, we want to be sensitive to people's time. I just want to let you know that. Yeah.
No, we're getting great things coming in through our Q&A. So to our audience members, now's the time if you want to put some questions into the ask function. I will go through them and do our best to cover as many as we can with the time that we have. Audience members also submitted questions in advance, so I have a list of those as well. So I thought maybe we could talk with, our focus really has been on the classroom tonight, and that was certainly by design, given what we were doing. But do you see ways that this strategy can help maybe with people who have family members or friends that they're trying to engage in these conversations? Do you see this pedagogy working outside of the classroom as well as within our classrooms?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, dear sister. I mean, the triple A's of social justice consciousness is something that every single human being goes through or doesn't go through. I look at some of my cousins and I say, okay, this is the brother who's still dealing with number one, that first acknowledgement. And then I got the other cousin talking about, oh, defund this and did that. Okay, are you at the accountability? I get it. But certainly, one of the things that we can do in order to understand why we have such a problem in this country talking about race is because we haven't acknowledged that we don't all exist on the same space on the spectrum. Where are you on the spectrum? That's not just a question for teachers, that's a question for every single American. Where are you on the spectrum of social justice consciousness? And are you willing to help someone move their spot on the spectrum?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's see. So this is a great question. A lot of our conversation often ends up sort of looking at courses that are rooted in the humanities, but we do have questions from folks who are maybe in the sciences or social sciences. Is there anything specific to their experience that maybe you could talk about a little bit?
Absolutely. So all of my comments tonight are really focused with the presumption that these are courses where race is a central topic. But let me be clear. If you want to call yourself an anti-racist educator or you're interested in anti-racist pedagogy, it doesn't matter what you're teaching. If you have a commitment, so here's what I'm saying. Being an anti-racist pedagogy requires a commitment to having conversations about racial justice in the classroom. So to all the biologists and scientists, because I get this question all the time, how do I incorporate a conversation about race in a classroom about biology? You know how you do it? You have a conversation about race in a classroom in biology. It really is just that simple. I'm not trying to be rhetorical here, but what I'm saying is, it actually, those people who are in those fields, in many ways, have the potential to do the most interventive and innovative work. Because what would it mean in a class on intro to biology that your professor has made space to talk about race? But what it tells the students is that this is an issue that affects all of us. And so anti-racist pedagogy, what I'm saying, is not simply something to check off. It is a commitment. And if you are committed to it, then you are committed to having that conversation no matter what your course content is. And it will shift the way students understand the centrality of race to American public life. So yes, please, in those science classes, make space for conversations about race to teach students that it is such an important issue that even in a class that has nothing to do with race, we're having a conversation about race. That is how we transform this country and transform the epidemic of racial apathy.
Awesome, thank you. So it's difficult to quantify this sort of thing, right? What are some things that we can look at to say like, oh, are we making progress, or are we doing things correctly? What are some things that you look at that you say, oh, okay, this is an organization that's taken some correct steps or has made some progress compared to where they were 5 years ago? How do we know if we're on the right track?
Great question. For me, it's about, are you listening to people? First of all, are you listening to students? I can't tell you how many times I have the pleasure of going to these institutions and I get to meet with the provost or the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're telling us about what they need and what the university needs. And then I sneak through the back door at the BSU meeting and I get to talk to the Black students on campus or the students of color on campus. And what they say they need is completely different than what the administrators think that they need. Which is to say, the way you measure success is, are you listening to students? The role of the anti-racist educator on a college campus is to be willing to trust student knowledge above your own. Meaning, don't assume you know what's best for it. Sometimes we assume, okay, all the students of color need is a resource center, a cultural center, and a couple new classes. Well, you might find out that's actually not what the students of color or the women or the poor underrepresented, under-economically privileged students want on campus. They might want something different. So what do the students need? That is my answer to that question.
Awesome. Thank you. So we've got several questions that sort of deal with this idea of challenging authority in the academic space while not getting in trouble. And I see this I've seen it from people asking from the perspective of graduate students. How do graduate students challenge the system without getting in trouble? I have a couple questions in here from faculty members who ask it as well from as faculty perspectives. How do they challenge things without getting in trouble?
Yeah, it's an impossible question. It's not an impossible question. It's a very straightforward answer to the question, which is it's not possible. That part of the role of the anti-racist pedagogue, of the anti-racist educator, is to be willing to get in trouble, right? I'm talking about that John Lewis good trouble, that necessary trouble, right? But it's impossible because these institutions are not interested, ultimately, in liberating the very people who need to be liberated most. You're going to get in trouble. And we're in the middle of a kind of a reawakening. So you're going to get in trouble. And so that's why doing this work isn't for everybody. It requires more than, doing a documentary or having one guest speaker come on. You have to be willing to get in trouble, because you have to remember that in the long view of history, you will be a winner. But you've got to be willing possibly to take some short-term losses. And that is a spiritual question that a lot of us are not really willing to wrestle with. It's not an easy answer.
Yeah, it's not. Let's see. So there's been a recent development at USF that our undergraduate curriculum in the College of Education is going to be phased out, that is a plan that's happening right now. So the USF will no longer be teaching undergraduates who are being prepared to go out into the classroom and be K through 12 teachers.
Wow.
So if the space at the university is not a space where we are educating pre-professionals, what are some, do you see that as a problem?
Absolutely.
That we may be stepping back from that? And B, what is the alternative for those pre-professionals? Do they have to take that burden on themselves of self-educating, or what do you think?
Well, first of all, we have to get clear about what we're asking for. So social movements, the success of any social movement really depends on the clarity of the ask. So if students are asking for the continuation of these programs. And if faculty are in agreement, then we need to be clear about asking the administration for what we want. And also, as Frederick Douglass reminds us, power concedes nothing without a demand. So not only do we have to ask, we have to demand it by saying, if we don't get this, then this is going to happen. Which is all this is to say this is Liz. I think we forget our power so much as students and as teachers and as staff members at these institutions. The power of the people is always stronger than the people in power. And so if the people decide, and when I say the people, I mean the students of USF, whose money is essential to the sustenance and continuation of this fine institution, if they decide that they need that major and they need that undergraduate curriculum to remain in place, then they need to make clear that it's not going anywhere. And we've seen it happen years ago at the University of Missouri, Mizzou, 2015. Black students wanted their president to resign. Huge. They said, you know what, we're unhappy here. We want the president to resign. University laughed at them, said, ha ha ha, it's not gonna happen. What happened? The football players said, guess what? Here's how this is gonna work. If he doesn't resign, then we won't play football. And if you know anything about football at the University of Mizzou, each game lost is $1.4 million. That university president resigned in 30 days. Now, we don't want the president of the USF to resign, right? But whatever the communal ask is of your community, be willing to get clear about what you want and then organize to demand that it happen. I think that only answered one half of the question. Maybe we'll circle back to that.
No, I think we're on track. It's been a recent development for us, so I think a lot of people are still struggling with it, and there are some economic realities of what this pandemic has done to the financial status of universities. And these are some really, really difficult conversations that have started to happen, but I think are going to continue to happen. So let me scroll through our questions here. We have so many great questions, and I apologize in advance if I don't specifically get to yours. A lot of folks are asking about, will this presentation be available to share? Will we have some graphics we can share? To audience members who are asking that, yes, we are going to have this available. You'll get a follow-up email, and we'll have it on our website. And I'm going to ask Jade to please pop the Humanities Institute website into the chat so that you can bookmark that, where we'll post that video when it's done processing. Let's see. So one of the things I wanted to circle back to is this idea of empathy and loving with conviction, because I do think we've reached a point in our contemporary conversations where things are so contentious, where it really can feel like a very, very divisive issue. People are on two sides. There's no meeting ground in between. I know I saw on your social media when Senator McCain passed away that you sort of rebuked people who were, if not celebrating his death, at least saying some things that you found inappropriate. I wondered if we could talk about that a little bit, this idea of, loving with conviction and having a sort of radical kind of empathy.
Absolutely, that there is nothing more radical and more simple than understanding that we are all human beings. And so as human beings, all of us live, die, hurt, make mistakes. And as human beings, we sometimes do terrible things. We are attached to terrible policies, terrible legacies, but yet we are human beings. And so radical empathy is about being able to understand someone who is not in your shoes and recognize their humanity. So I can't think of someone who I'm more ideologically opposed to than Senator John McCain. But he was a human being who was the father of children, who had a wife who loved him, who passed away too soon from a horrible disease. What kind of human being would I be to celebrate the death of any person? And so all of us, part of the problem in this moment is that you're right, we've become so divided. And so in our camps, that we don't recognize the kind of Orwellian tribalism that has overtaken America, where we don't recognize that at the end of the day, anyone who's on the street bleeding or unclothed or in need, I stand in solidarity with. Because I am a humanist first and foremost. And it's important to understand these social justice movements are also humans, right? When we talk about Black Lives Matter, it is not to say that any other life doesn't matter. And we know that if all lives matter, then we should be fighting like hell for Black lives. And Black Lives Matter as a movement is simply calling for a recognition of Black people's humanity. Black people have a real good legacy of recognizing other people's humanity. And we just want the world to recognize our humanity as well. So that's a tradition that I come out of.
Awesome. Thank you. On the topic of we're all human and we make mistakes, I wondered if you could talk a little bit. I know a lot of educators, I certainly feel this in my classroom, have this horrible anxiety that I'm gonna say something wrong or do something wrong, that my white privilege is just gonna come glaring through in a super obvious way. And of course it always does in some way, shape, or form. Could you address this this fear that I think a lot of educators have, that we're going to get it wrong in the classroom, and maybe talk to that a little bit? Because I think a lot of us use it as a reason to maybe not engage as much as we should because we're afraid we're going to get it wrong.
Yeah, and I think this is particularly true for our white brothers and sisters on college campuses, many of whom are super woke and want to join the freedom struggle, but feel like they can't enter the conversation because they're going to be attacked or they don't know what to say. And the best thing to do is to admit that. And I think as an educator, what you must do is create space for all students to speak from their experience and to get it wrong. And so that's why I emphasize when I talk about the importance of naming. Name who you are when you enter the conversation. You say, listen, as a white woman, I'm struggling with this. And as a white woman, I feel uncomfortable. I can say, as a man, I feel uncomfortable. My intention is not to offend, but I'm going to be clear in my experience. So that's like the magic word, right? So everything I say in the classroom is always prefaced with in my experience, which makes clear I'm speaking from my experience. And if you go back to those collective agreements, collective agreement number 4, I think, everyone is an expert of their own experience. I can debate with you right and wrong. I can't debate your experience. And so starting from that place, and we have to be willing to create an environment where everyone feels comfortable. So I'm real clear in my classroom. And some of my class students, I get some slack for this. But I don't subscribe to this idea that the people of color are the experts and the white folks are the folks who need to be transformed. No, we are all there to learn. There are no experts in my classroom. We all get to get it right and to get it wrong together. No one will be attacked, and everyone has to have space to speak their truth and to ask questions. We have to remember, at the end of the day, we are part of a liberal arts tradition. We are here to learn together, fail together. And as I think that was Brett said, or Becky, fail better, fail again, right? That's what we have to do.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions here. This is a great question. I think it speaks a little bit to your discussion of intersectionality. What strategies do you suggest that both make space for the Black experience in anti-racism, but that can also develop multiracial coalitions to advance justice for all race and ethnic minority groups?
Well, for instance, you think about the movement for Black Lives. You think about Black Lives Matter founded by these 3 Black women. And then you ask yourself, okay, well, it's founded by these 3 Black women, 2 of whom are queer. So like I said, this means that we're not only talking about Black history, but also LGBT history. But then you think about something, for instance, like the Stonewall riots of 1969. Another community poll. How many people remember Stonewall? Of course, those who don't remember the Stonewall riots, that fateful weekend, the last weekend in June of 1969, when queer and trans folk rose up and rioted in the streets of Greenwich Village. It was the so-called birth of the gay rights movement. Why is that important? What were they fighting for at Stonewall? What was the rebellion about? Police violence, right? And so what that means is we know that the struggles of queer and trans folk, many of whom were white, at Stonewall is not altogether different than the struggles of contemporary Black youth in Ferguson. We don't want to conflate those things by any means, but we do want to call attention to their intersections. And that's why it is very important as an anti-racist educator that you come into those classroom spaces with the familiarity of these intersectional histories, so that your students can begin drawing, drawing conclusions and then connecting the dots as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Let's see, where would be a good sort of place to end? So we didn't plan it this way, I swear, but yes, your first talk when you came to USF was right after the inauguration. And there certainly was a tremendous amount of anxiety, and USF was undergoing like a lot of universities, some very strange sort of outbursts of behavior. And so it's interesting that we have you now coming back on the eve of an election. One of the other things that this community specifically experienced over the summer was during the wave of protests following George Floyd's murder. There was quite a bit of protest and unrest in the Tampa Bay area, as there was in many other cities. But there actually was some property damage, some buildings burned very close to campus. So I know that this is something that a lot of people experienced in a very personal way. And you have always had a really interesting and I think very important take on nonviolence and protest and what meaningful protest is. And since that's something that our community experienced pretty firsthand, I wondered if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Well, a couple things is to say, I think that we should stop using the term, I think we should stop referring to the destruction of buildings as violence and start referring to it as property damage, which is what it is. And we don't want property damage. But part of the problem is the false equivalencies in naming that as violence. It sets up a false equivalence between the destruction of actual bodies and the destruction of property, and it's not the same thing. So that's number one. Number two, it's so important to understand that if you have no history of critiquing the underlying sociological conditions that lead to these riots, then you really should not be opining on rioting and looting, right? That there's a violence there going on, to be careful, because let's be clear, looting and violence, which I never condone, right? Which I never want to, it's never something I would participate in or want to have happen, but I am clear. Looting and rioting are the collateral consequences of a culture of mass injustice. So if we want the looting to stop, then we've got to have the injustices stop. I've never heard of riots springing up in the aftermath of a police officer actually being found guilty for killing a Black person, right? It only happens in response to what a community sees as centuries of injustice. And so we talk about that radical empathy. We have to empathize with those whose property is being damaged, but we have to also understand the sociological currents that push people to desperate behavior when they have been systematically denied justice. All that was fancy jargon for, listen, you want the looting to stop? Then have our unjust criminal justice be stopped. Right? You want the riots to end, then end our unjust criminal justice system. Until it happens, unless and until you're willing to have both conversations side by side, you're actually going about this conversation the wrong way.
Awesome. And I had one last question pop in once we started talking about this. How can faculty support students who have been arrested for peaceful protest?
Wow, how can faculty support students who have been arrested for peaceful protest? Every university has its own rules and regulations about faculty-student boundaries. So I'm just thinking about how to do that. I mean, one way might be if you are, like for instance, in the 5 or 6 times I've done my BLM course, you can feel in the air when we're about to experience another wave of protest. So one thing I do preemptively is I provide students with resources for bail funds and what to do in the event they are arrested in a protest. But that's before anything ever happens, right? So in real time, this is what this could look like. If we see that, there's been another jury, a non-indictment handed down by a jury, and we're hearing about protests springing up, one thing the responsible anti-racist educator would say, listen, for those students who are planning on being engaged in peaceful protests, here are some resources for what you can do in the event that you are arrested. To me, that's the safest way. Now, if you want to dig deeper, there are resources for actually contributing to bail funds as faculty to help bail out students. That's a little bit further, but I would say first and foremost, provide students with resources for what to do in the event that they're actually arrested.
That's awesome. Well, we could continue on for many hours. I mean, I think this is really incredible, and I think has helped a lot of us take our sort of next step. I'm reading tons of comments from folks who are very, very appreciative for you spending your time with us.
Do I get to see the comments?
No, you don't get to see the comments, unfortunately. But I will send some of them to you. But a lot of people indicating that they really appreciate it. This has opened their eyes. They're looking forward to sharing this information with colleagues. One said, "You can't see this, but I'm clapping really loud." So I think that this really resonated, and I think touched on something that we all really needed to hear a good message on. So I thank you sincerely for your time with us tonight. And again, to our audience members who shared their Tuesday night with us as well. We're going to put some links in the chat for you. One to our website where you will be able to view this video once it is ready to share. I'm also going to put a link in there if you are able to support the work of the Humanities Institute. Our work is funded largely with the donations of wonderful and kind people. So if you're in a position to help us in that way, we'll put that link in there as well. If any of you have any questions or want to be more involved, I really encourage you to get in touch with the Institute on Black Life, to get in touch with us at the Humanities Institute. And Jade, who is amazing, reminded me that you can also register for an event with Ibram X. Kendi, who's going to be the Frontier Forum speaker in November, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. So the link to register for that webinar is also in the chat.
Let me also give my Twitter. I forgot to give that out because sometimes that's the easiest way for students to reach me. It's just, even though I barely use Twitter, but if you at me, I'll find you. It's just at Dr. Frank Roberts, and my email address is just frankroberts@nyu.edu.
Okay, awesome. We'll pop that in there as well. So again, Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for your time, your intelligence, your passion on this subject. Thank you to all of you in our audience, and we will wrap it up for the evening.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.